Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about why it is important that we train above 90% on big exercises in order to both correct our technique, correct our form, as well as to find what our weak links are and correct those as well. Now, this is something that isn't as important with smaller exercises, particularly single joint exercises. And the reason I say that is that smaller exercises, our strength on them is pretty much determined by hypertrophy. So when we say size equals strength, when we are talking about a leg extension or a machine curl, there is a direct one-to-one correlation with size and strength. So any exercise that makes that muscle bigger, you will get a proportionate increase in the amount of weight you can move when locked into a machine on an exercise that doesn't allow more than one joint to move. So in other words, if it's a single joint movement to where you physically cannot move another joint and you contract as hard as you possibly can for a 1 rep max for that isolated muscle, and again, it's only isolated in a machine. You can't consciously isolate muscles. That's a bodybuilding myth. But hypertrophy is the primary determiner of your strength. There is very, very little else that is directly involved. Neuromuscular efficiency and things beyond the genetic level don't matter a lot at that point. So in other words, if you wanted to get really good at a strict curl, since you can't change your levers, the only real thing you can do is make a muscle bigger if you want to get better at something that is a strictly isolated machine single joint movement. All right, that's the most important thing you can do, is to just get as much hypertrophy as possible in that target muscle, and specifically in the heads that are involved in that specific movement. Because obviously the quad, for example, does more than just bend the knee, right? It has hip movement and stuff involved also. So for a leg extension machine, you'd want to hypertrophy it, right? Same thing with a machine curl, to where you're actually kind of locked in, like if your arm is strapped to the bench to where you can't move your torso. All you could do is get bigger biceps. And it's the same when it comes to isometric strength. That's what we find, even if, let's say, you take an athlete and they do a lot of squatting. It doesn't really matter whether they built their size with 3 reps or 10 reps, right? It doesn't actually matter. Their size that they've developed from squatting is what's going to determine isometric strength, right? So when we test isometric strength against weight plates that can measure it, that you're not allowed to move, and you just move against it, you press as hard as you can against a stationary object, your isometric strength, it also isn't determined by rep range at all either. But when it comes to big movements, such as the things I'm demonstrating here, squats, deadlifts, bench presses, overhead presses, chin-ups, pull-ups, any of these things, your strength is going to be determined by neuromuscular efficiency and movement patterns. And where do a lot of those come from? Learning the position, learning the movement. They come from those things in addition to the weak points and the hypertrophy. So what we find is that to perfect form with a heavy weight, you actually have to practice a heavy weight on that exercise. In other words, we can develop brute strength, but brute strength comes largely from overall strength, which can be done through a variety of exercises, and it comes from muscle mass. In other words, if we took someone and got them really strong at the push press, and we got them really strong at weighted dips, they could probably bench a pretty heavy amount of weight. In other words, they will carry over just through the muscle mass and the brute strength that they've developed through those multi-joint exercises. But if that person doesn't do any heavy work on the bench, they're not going to perfect the technique on the bench. And in order to get perfect technique to where you can move the most weight on any big exercise, you actually have to go above 90% of your 1 rep max. In other words, that's where form breakdown occurs. That's where your learning curve is for learning to lift a really heavy weight on that exercise. That's where bad habits come out. Any bad habit that you've learned in training doesn't appear when you're working with 60 or 70%. Right? If you take a weight that you can lift 8 or 10 times, you can do a perfect rep with it. It looks to be textbook perfect. You'll see no form breakdowns, and you can make it look beautiful, just like the thing in the little textbook demonstration video. But you still might not be finding your ideal leverages, because what you're going to find for any given person, there's only going to be certain hip angles. There's only going to be certain elbow positions. There's only going to be certain bar paths to where you can lift the most weight possible. And on an exercise, it could literally be the difference between 500 pounds and 450 pounds and how much you can lift with the same amount of strength and the same amount of muscle mass, depending on if you've ever practiced that lift really heavy. Because when you can lift 450 with bad form, and you've never practiced going really heavy, and that's where your form breaks down, that might be all you can push. And you might actually have muscles that are capable of moving 500 plus who are in the chain. And so when you push against that heavy weight, that really heavy weight, when we start going above 90%, that's where you learn to find the positions that give you the best levers. When you go to 90% or more, the bar path where the weight feels the lightest is noticeable. So if you do multiple different reps, singles, at say 90% on an exercise, and you notice slight differences in hand position, elbow position, bar path, it's going to feel lighter and easier in some of those. And those are things that you're not going to notice at 85%. They're things that you're not going to notice at 80%. Those bar path and those biomechanical differences for you as an individual are not going to come out till you start getting really heavy. And it literally could make the difference between on your max weight on that lift of being able to lift 450 or 460 versus 500 pounds. It can be that much difference. And so in order to learn to lift heavy on that, the heaviest reps are the only ones that really count. In other words, we can practice all day long with lighter weights. We can practice all day long with speed work. We can practice all day long with sets of 5. They're still not going to give you the skill necessary to lift the most weight possible with the amount of muscle and strength that you possess on that exercise until you practice finding your groove on the heavy versions of it, and then finding your proper technique. Well, what's the other thing that we see demonstrated? Perfect example, take my squat. Like you guys see me, I'm rebuilding my squat. You guys have seen me squat 500 plus before. You guys also remember I got back up to 485 every day last year. Then I cut, and then I had a minor back pull, and so I've had to rehab all of that. I've been rebuilding back up. What's the most of you guys have seen me do is 455, right? What happens when I go to 455? We see a minor 4 breakdown happen, don't we? We don't see that at 425 until I get to 3 or 4 reps, or until I do a 5th single in a row, right? 425 or 435, I have perfect form with no thoracic rounding. So at 85%, 86%, my form is perfect. Just like right there, look at that, 405, perfect form. Because I'm under 90% of my max. Well, 90% of what my max would be with my current technique. But then when I go heavier, what do we see happen? When I go to like 455, we start to see thoracic rounding come out. Or what happens when I did 5 reps with that 405 the other day? Because now we're above 90%. Once I've done the first 4, I'm fatigued, right? The 5th rep, I'm tired. We're exceeding RPE 9 at that point. The thoracic rounding, my upper back rounds. But what do we notice? Does the bar stop? No, it's not a sticking point. Do I fall forward? No, there's no forward falling in my body. In other words, the bar is staying directly above my midfoot. There's no loss of center of gravity. But we see my form start to degrade. We see a weakness come out. What you notice is that for me, and we're just using me as an example, and this is stuff you can do on your own exercises, my quads, my hips, my glutes, all of that are strong enough to just keep moving that weight. Nothing slows. They just keep moving forward. They're strong. My upper back can't quite keep up with the force that my lower body is generating. So what that tells us is that my lower body, if that's happening with 455 and I'm still locking it clean, it's just there's some form deviation that occurs. It's not perfect form anymore. That's perfect form. Look at the 425. Perfect form. Perfect form for a normal Olympic squat, because that's what that is. It's an Olympic squat. But if I go 30 pounds heavier, the upper back rounds, that means that the upper back is weak. So What's preventing me at this point from hitting a 500 squat? My thoracic spine strength, because I need to be able to get to a point where that upper back stays up and it doesn't round at all. A little bit's okay, but not the amount that we see from me when I go heavy. So what would happen if I strengthened that muscle up? That's the weakest link, my upper back, right? T-spine, thoracic erectors, mid-traps, all that stuff. Well, if those got stronger, then my upper body would be able to stabilize the weight and push through easier and keep it further back that my lower body is capable of driving up. Well, that means I might be good for 490, 500 pounds. So half of my body is capable of lifting at and the other half isn't. So what happens if you identify that weakness? Because that's when form breakdown occurs. Like right there, that was my 5th single of the day. And you saw it kind of me drop all the way ass to grass and have some form breakdown because I was fatigued. So once we start getting really heavy and that fatigue sets in, we see where our weaknesses are. You see where your weak link is in an exercise, and that can help you identify which muscles are the weakest, because all of our muscles are strong below that final threshold. Of course we are. We're generally as strong as we should be. Our weakest muscles don't come out. They start coming out when we go above 90%. That's when you see, when you start going above 90% of what the strongest muscles in your body can lift, the weak muscles stand out and you see form deviations occur. And those form deviations tell you what you need to work on. So it's not just an issue of learning technique, it's using the form breakdown to figure out where your weaknesses lay. And you cannot find those weaknesses with a moderate weight. Like there's no way those weaknesses are going to come out for me if I did a bunch of triples with 405, right? It's just not heavy enough. And so this is the other reason we need to train above 90% to identify your weakest links in a lift. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.